Good morning. I know people are still coming in, so move on in and take your seats. A lot of room over at this end of the auditorium. I'm David Foster, the Executive Director of the Blue-Green Alliance, and on behalf of the Conference Coordinating Committee and the 31 organizations that have worked hard to plan this program, and on behalf of the 178 convening organizations and businesses who have publicized this event, among their members, I want to welcome you to our 6th annual Good Jobs, Green Jobs Conference. Now, we've worked hard to organize this event in order to address our two most persistent structural problems. On the one hand, chronic unemployment that's ripping the fabric of our communities apart, and on the other, an intensifying and destabilizing climate that is dramatically disrupting our economy and putting us all at risk. We hear these stories from every corner of our economy. Iron ore boats, which have had to cut their cargo by 10% on the Great Lakes because water levels have dropped so significantly in their locks and ports. Meatpacking plants closing in Texas because persistent drought has made cattle grazing impossible. Forestry jobs eliminated because of pine bark beetle infestations. And tourism jobs eliminated by erratic snow seasons. Far too often we hear that we can't fix one problem without worsening the other. That the only way to create jobs is to increase the pollution that causes the droughts, the wildfires, and the superstorms. Or that the only way to cut the pollution is to lay off employees in our factories, power plants, and go back into a recession. Well, we're here today, once again, to shout down this myth. We do believe we can have good jobs and a clean environment, don't we? And not just a few jobs, millions of jobs. And the proof is right in front of us. Now, not that long ago, and all of you remember this, the U.S. auto industry was in free fall. Some thought we were witnessing the end of the American automotive industry and that there was no path back. And there were some people who shrugged, some of them ran for president, called it the creative destruction of the free market. They thought it was a good thing. But thankfully, there were others like Bob King and the United Auto Workers who rolled up their sleeves and said there was another way. Are there auto workers in the house? And thankfully, there were far-sighted advocates for the environment like the Union of Concerned Scientists, the National Wildlife Federation, NRDC, the Sierra Club. All of them believed we needed an American-made car that could get over 50 miles to the gallon. And thankfully, there were smart regulators like Lisa Jackson at the EPA and her team of engineers, dedicated, far-sighted legislators like Fran Pavley from California, who's with us today. And lastly, let's celebrate that there were companies like General Motors who weren't willing to be carved up in the bankruptcy process and sold off to scrap metal, to vulture investors, and instead took on the engineering challenge of the Chevy Volt and the Chevy Cruze, and you can go out and drive them on your brakes today. You know this story. It's labor, environmental organizations, businesses, and government coming together and committing themselves to smart, forward-looking regulations and solving the problems that have now made the U.S. auto industry the envy of the world again. Created over 1 million jobs in less than 2 years, including hundreds of thousands of them in manufacturing, and not just in auto plants. It put the iron ore miners in northern Minnesota back to work. And it gave a future to aluminum extruding workers in plants like those in Bellwood, Virginia, on the verge of closing down, who are now making aluminum drive shafts for lightweight vehicles. It put money in workers' pockets who could buy health care again, clothes, food, pay local taxes, That's what got our economy moving again. It's not a story of one side winning and another losing. It's the story of how we always solve big problems in America by working together and then by sharing in the results. So that auto industry recovery is a lesson for all of us. There is a way for us to stop the slide in America toward a future with crumbling roads and bridges, power grids that fail repeatedly in the face of increasingly violent storms, water systems that leak billions of gallons of drinkable water but can no longer handle the storm surges of rising sea levels, or transit systems that provide too few options for too many people to get back and forth from work and family. By fixing all these things and fixing them the right way, we can create the millions of jobs our families need, prepare for the worsening impacts of climate change, and avoid the worst ones that are on the horizon. But, most of you here today, you know all these things. Most of you, I suspect, feel like me. We fought too hard to get a president reelected who believes in the science of climate change to now end up doing nothing to correct the problem. We fought too hard. We fought too hard to elect other public officials who recognize the challenges in front of us, to then move too slowly to make a difference, or to leave a generation of our young people with no hope for jobs or careers. We know we face a difficult challenge as a country with a divided Congress where failure seems preferable to compromise, but that doesn't entitle us to shrug and go home and give up. We've got to have a strategy and response. And even a country as divided as ours, even in a country as divided as ours, politics can and does move forward. The auto industry was one example. Immigration reform may be another. But these compromises happen only when motivated coalitions build movements strong enough to bring their opponents to the negotiating table. So an annual conference is only as good as the activity it launches. So for our part, the Blue-Green Alliance is pledging to go forward from this conference, committed to a national campaign that connects climate solutions and job creation, whether a federal legislative approach or smart EPA regulatory activity on power plants. This was the path that rebuilt the auto industry, and it's the path that can rebuild America. Thank you. I want to quickly draw your attention to the Stay in Touch cards that are on your table. If we're going to go out of this conference accomplishing things, we need to know who all of you are, and we need your commitment to stay in touch and keep working. So please fill those cards out and follow us in every other way on social media that you can. And now I'd like to introduce one of the two co-chairs of the Blue-Green Alliance, the leader of the Sierra Club, Michael Brune, their executive director. Since taking over the reins of the Sierra Club in 2010, Mike has led his organization to new heights in their efforts to reduce carbon pollution, address climate change, and protect our environment. Michael spent his career working to protect and preserve our natural world, and he has become, since becoming executive director of the Sierra Club, also a leader on labor and democracy rights. Please join me in welcoming Michael Brune.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone. So I wanted to start, actually, before we get too far into this, by just extending our thoughts and prayers to the participants in the Boston Marathon yesterday, and to the friends and families of all of those who were either injured or who had someone who was injured by the events. I think like a lot of you, I spent a lot of time watching the screen last night and just seeing this parade of horrific images floating by. And I kept thinking about, how do I talk about this to my kids? How do I go home, and my daughter's 8 years old, and how can I describe to her how to be safe and also not live in a world with fear, how to not be dominated by fear and anger. And I think the next couple days are going to be particularly difficult for the people in Boston, but I think that all of us who are involved in a public discourse about what we want our country to look like have a role to play in making sure that we don't, as in past incidents like this, how we don't become gripped by fear. I think that we're here today really to offer a vision for what we want the country to look like. We know that we're here today because there are millions of people who are out of work, 5, 6, 7 years past the beginning of the Great Recession. There are millions of people who are underemployed or who have given up looking for work. We know that we're here today because right at the time when we should be investing in public infrastructure and we should be strengthening labor rights all across the country, we're cutting public spending and we're eroding labor rights and the rights of working families all across the country. We're here today because right at the time that we should be accelerating a transition away from dirty fuels, we've seen record droughts, record wildfires, record storms, a temperature in 2012 that was a full degree Fahrenheit above the previous record temperature, and we're going nowhere in terms of federal policy on climate change. We're also here today because the people who often are at the front lines of our environmental struggles, undocumented Americans, don't even have an ability to use the full rights of citizenship to fight for clean air and clean water and a healthy environment. The Sierra Club was founded 121 years ago on the basic idea that we want to take people into nature to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. Our founder, John Muir, really started the Sierra Club almost as an adventure travel organization. He took people from the San Francisco Bay Area into Yosemite National Park with the idea that if you expose people to the wonders of Yosemite Valley, that they would become inspired to take action for the environment. They would become inspired to protect Yosemite Valley and protect places all across the California Sierra. We've since grown into an organization with chapters in every state, local volunteer groups in almost every major city across the country, but we have the same basic ethic that we want people to explore nature, but we also want them to explore what it means to live in a just and sustainable world in the 21st century. And that commitment extends to our commitment for social justice. We know that by working with LIUNA, we can cut greenhouse gas emissions, we can cut the amount of energy that we're using by investing in energy efficiency and create jobs. We know that we can work with the United Auto Workers and cut the amount of oil that we're using in our cars and trucks and create jobs at the same time. We know that we can work with the transit workers all across the country and cut the amount of energy that we're using there, cut congestion, and cut jobs. We also know that solar panels don't install themselves, and that millions of people all across the country, all around the world, can be put to work by creating a clean energy future. We know that wind turbines don't repair themselves, don't maintain themselves, aren't manufactured by themselves. But what we also know is that the Blue-Green Alliance, the labor movement, the environmental movement, won't come together by itself. We won't really become a unified movement simply by fiat, or even simply by holding a conference. It's going to take work. It's going to take work at the local level. So all of these tables out here this morning, all of the work that we're doing at the state level, that's where our successes will come from. If we are to build a unified movement to work for environmental justice, to work for economic justice, to put millions of people to work, the only way that's going to happen is if we find new ways to work together. One of those projects could be to make sure that every public building all across the country invests in energy efficiency. Another one of those projects could be making sure that solar panels are installed in every community building, every state building, every federal building all across the country. One of those projects could employ hundreds of thousands of people over the next generation by repairing and replacing old and dirty water pipelines or gas pipelines, where we can invest in new infrastructure, cut greenhouse gas emissions, prevent methane from escaping from our gas pipelines, and put hundreds of thousands of people to work altogether. None of this happens by itself. All of this is dependent on energy coming from the grassroots, from local communities, town by town, city by city, state by state, all across the country. Despite the fact that we're already seeing the effects of a warming planet, we also are reaching a new tipping point. We're starting to reduce oil consumption. We've cut oil consumption by several million barrels of oil per day over the last several years. We're starting to replace dirty fuels like coal-fired power with solar and wind and energy efficiency. We need to make sure that as we transition away from those dirty fuels towards clean energy, that we're bringing the workforce along with it, and we're creating jobs, we're adding jobs, and taking care of the workers in the process. So how we do that is really up to us. It's our job to provide a clean energy vision and then take that vision to policymakers and corporate executives all across the country. So it's great to see so many people here today. I'm excited about what we'll be doing over the next couple days, and I know that if we're going to create all these jobs, we've got to get to work ourselves. So thanks everybody for coming.
And now we'll hear from the other co-chair of the Blue-Green Alliance, a man who needs no introduction to this audience, Leo Gerard, the International President of the United Steelworkers.
Sit down, you're cutting into my time. I got a lot of relatives in the room. Let me try to be very quick because we got a very heavy agenda, and I have to apologize to the steelworkers in the hall and those that will be coming later. I'm proving that I'm not a very good organizer. We've in fact got 3 steelworker events going on in the same day in 2 different countries. So I have to leave this country to go to another one, then I'll come back eventually, I think. Let me just say that sitting here and listening to Michael and David, I wanted to reflect that 6 years ago, and either 6 conferences ago, or 9 if you count the 4 that we held in regional areas last year, we launched with the Sierra Club and the Steelworkers and David Foster, the Blue-Green Alliance. At that time, we launched it at the National Press Club. There was Carl Pope from the Sierra Club, myself from the Steelworkers, and Dave Foster, who we had appointed as the executive director. And 3 or 4 other media folks came because they actually thought we were crazy and didn't quite know what we were doing. Since then, we've made a terrific impact, and you may not know this, but of the affiliate organizations affiliated to the Blue-Green Alliance, we have close to 15 million affiliated members. If we can motivate and mobilize those members, we can make a whole difference. And I'm one of the folks that wants to say it's not good jobs or a clean environment. It's not either or. For us and for our kids and our grandkids and our grandkids' grandkids, it's either going to be both or neither in the long run. And Michael and David's points about coming together and creating a movement are real. And the movement isn't just about green jobs, because we can't define what a green job is in real terms for many people. If you're going to build wind turbines and you're going to use steel that's made in America, I can tell you what, that will revitalize plate mills and our steel mills. And when we revitalize those plate mills, we can do it in an energy efficient way, and we can save energy. And we can make what would then become a green product because we'd be making windmills. Let me run through some of the opportunities for real jobs. And we ought to mobilize for these jobs. We ought not let the naysayers in Congress or at the state level stop us from making progress. More than 50% of the schools in the U.S. that our kids and our grandkids go to are more than 50 years old. That means they're inefficient in the energy they produce and the heating and cooling systems. Our water treatment plants. In many places, our cities and towns don't have water treatment plants. We ought to make sure that they do. We ought to fight for that at the municipal level, at the state level, and the federal level. Our buildings. Most of our public buildings, whether they're courthouses or city halls or federal buildings, most of them are more than 50 years old. They're inefficient. They use and waste energy in a way that we can't imagine. You heard Michael talk about water lines and gas lines and oil pipelines. 2.5 million miles of existing pipeline, of which the majority was built before there were any regulations for pipelines. Those are real jobs. Building them, installing them, putting the most scientific monitoring systems in them, mass transit. You go to our major cities and we're all clogged, we can't get around, fighting for mass transit, fighting for high-speed rail, demanding that that be made in America, at least at a percentage. I can tell you that we lost 360 members in a plant that was making collars for wind turbines because that company wanted to make those wind turbines in China, and China said, unless you're going to have 80% domestic content, you can't produce wind turbines in China. That plant closed. They made those collars now in China, and that company is now producing in China. We need to make a stand about that. Solar, biomass, those are all opportunities for real jobs. And let me just run through a couple of statistics. In less than a decade, China has become the largest market for wind. The U.S. now ranks 10th in installed clean energy capacity. And I can say without fear of being wrong, since the election in 2010, and I may offend if there's any Republicans here, just raise your hand if I piss you off. Since the Republicans got elected in the majority of the House in 2010, they've set the whole economic agenda back, and they stopped the movement to good jobs and a clean environment. And we need to make sure that they don't survive that. They have to pay a price for that. They have to pay a price for what they're doing to my kids' and grandkids' future. China installed more solar energy than the United States for the first time in 2011. If you follow what's being said, China said they were going to dominate the solar panel industry globally, even if they had to sell below the cost of production. We filed a trade case against China in 5 areas on renewable energy, and so far we've won 4. But you know what? It's pretty damn lonely out there. All of you, whether you're in the labor movement, whether you're in the environmental movement, need to take a stand that all of those things that I've run through, a huge percentage of that should be made in America so that we can get the R&D, and as we clean up the environment, as we make it safer for the next generation, we're also creating good jobs for the future for our kids and our grandkids as well as for ourselves. That's the purpose of the Blue-Green Alliance. The Blue-Green Alliance isn't just a social club where we can come together once every year and complain about what we didn't do or what we didn't accomplish. The Blue-Green Alliance has to be turned into a movement for good jobs and a clean environment. And you're part of that movement, and thank you for being here. It's now my pleasure and my honor to introduce someone who I admire tremendously. Building a stronger America is going to take a lot of hard work. Now there are, as I said, some in Congress who are hell-bent on stopping these efforts to move to cleaner energy, become more energy efficient, and to get systems that we should rely on every day systems like better roads and bridges, better transit systems, fixing our electrical grid and our communications network, fixing our water treatment plants that don't exist in many cases, doing all of the kind of work that I just talked about for green jobs and a better future. Congressman Waxman was one of the primary authors of the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, which comprehensively addressed the problems of urban smog, toxic air pollution, and acid rain, and the depletion of the stratospheric ozone layer. He introduced the first bill designed to stabilize the climate back in 1992, and was co-author of the 2009 American Clean Energy and Security Act that passed the House to address climate change and create good energy jobs. And let me say that at his lead in that, along with Congressman Markey, they also wanted to make sure that there was a border adjustment mechanism for the kind of behavior that I referred to from China. It's my honor and my pleasure to introduce Congressman Henry Waxman. Henry?
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and I'm particularly honored to be introduced by Leo Gerard, a man for whom I have such enormous respect. He embodies what this organization is all about. What we want are the alliance of people who care about jobs and people who care about the environment, because they really go together. This is the 6th annual conference of Good Jobs, Green Jobs, and your message gives a lie to the arguments that we have to choose between protecting our economy and protecting our environment. They go together. It's just like the line we heard from the right wing. Well, we have to choose between jobs and workers' safety and workers' rights. When we have collective bargaining, when we have regulation to make jobs better for people and safer for people, our economy grows. We can't be forced to choose between workers' rights and safety and the economy, or the environment and the economy. We're all in this together. So I thank you for your leadership and your vision. I want to talk about climate change, which I believe is the gravest environmental threat we face, and may be one of the greatest threats we've ever faced. Addressing climate change is a moral issue. We must act to prevent the worst scenarios from becoming a reality. We must protect our children and future generations from the unavoidable impacts. As Leo Gerard mentioned, I've been working on this issue for some time. In 1992, when some of you were just children, I introduced a bill to stabilize the carbon emissions. That didn't go very far, but in 2009 we got a bill that was comprehensive energy carbon control bill, the Waxman-Markey bill, through the House of Representatives, with the support of maybe all of you, but certainly many of you were very active in getting that legislation passed. It passed the House. Unfortunately, the Senate didn't act. And then the Republicans won the election and took over the House of Representatives. And they don't want to talk about climate change. They don't believe in the science. They don't want to hear from the experts. They have voted over and over and over again to stop regulation. They don't want us to fund research. They don't want the U.S. government to encourage other countries to do anything in this area. They want to completely put their heads in the sand. Well, we can't do that. We can't ignore this problem. We have made progress, despite them, through a lot of actions that the administration has taken and some things that Congress did as well. Our cars and trucks are clean and getting cleaner. We've had record deployment of renewable energy. Dirty power generation is being replaced with cleaner generation. And we've accomplished a lot in reducing carbon emissions, but we have a lot more work to do. Our fight is not over, and it's now more critical than ever that we work together to solve this global challenge. For decades, experts have talked about the potential future threats from climate change. They've warned us that in the future, we'll face extreme heat waves, floods, droughts, wildfires, ocean acidification, and dramatic sea level rise. As a result, many thought of climate change not as a problem for now, but something we can do later, a problem we can deal with later. Well, it's now happening faster than ever expected. We're already seeing the powerful effects of climate change on this nation. Scientists are now observing, measuring, and monitoring extreme events not only in the United States, but throughout the world. We are witnessing these predictions come true, and they are alarming. Scientists have attributed climate change recent extreme weather events, such as the 2011 Texas drought, which cost $12 billion, the 2003 summer heat wave across Europe that killed 70,000 people, and the 2008 drought in parts of the Middle East. Carbon pollution continues to load the dice, making the likelihood of extreme temperature and precipitation events more likely. Superstorm Sandy demonstrates how impacts of climate change on sea level, hurricane intensity, and storm surge can profoundly impact even our largest coastal communities. Storms and other weather events that occurred once in a century are now occurring multiple times in a decade. This is no longer an issue for later. Climate change is a threat to American families and especially to our children and grandchildren who will bear the brunt of the impacts. How serious will it be? Well, according to recent scientific research, if we stay on our current track, by mid-century, extreme summer heat waves will be the new normal. Our coastal communities will face extreme flooding risks. The ocean's coral reefs could simply dissolve. We can spend money after the disaster strikes, or we can spend money to decrease the risks of these disasters by funding mitigation and adaptation activities. So in the House, we're concerned about it. And Congressman Bobby Rush, who's the ranking member of the Energy Subcommittee, and I have sent over 20 letters to the chairman of our full committee, Fred Upton, and we said to him, why don't we hear from the experts? Why don't we have a hearing, just a hearing to learn the facts? And we've been rejected every time. We've had a lot of oil and coal executives give their views, but they won't listen to the experts on the threat from climate change. That's one reason I've started the Congressional Bicameral Task Force on Climate Change with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Our goal is to better educate the public and our colleagues, identify ways we can work together toward real actionable solutions. We want Congress to act, and if it won't act, we're going to push the administration to do all it can. I've also formed another group of just House members called the Safe Climate Caucus. Our goal is to speak every day on the House floor about the need for action. When you're in the minority in the House of Representatives, you can't set the agenda, you can't hold the hearings, you can't produce the legislation for markup, but we have something else we can do. We can speak out, and that's why the Safe Climate Caucus was organized. We can speak about the problem. We can continue to talk about it. We can continue to argue for action. And we're not completely powerless. Not only do we have a voice, but we have an administration where the President of the United States has said very clearly in his State of the Union address, if Congress will not act, he will act to reduce carbon pollution. Now, the President of the United States has a lot of authority to act on his own. Under the Clean Air Act, the EPA can set emission standards. The DOE, the Department of Energy, can set energy efficient standards. We know the State Department can go back and renegotiate the Montreal Protocol because HFCs that added to the deterioration of the upper ozone layer are 1,000 times more potent than some of the carbon emissions. And we can get the world to agree to reduce or if not eliminate these HFCs. There are tremendous opportunities associated with taking action. Policies that help reduce emissions, fortify our resiliency, promote clean energy infrastructure. This is going to strengthen our economy and create the next generation of jobs. People always say, oh, we want jobs, but we don't want to have to do things that will take away from jobs, like protect the environment, protect the workers, protect the safety of people in the industries. Well, we say to them, we've got to do these things together. They go hand in hand. In just last month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that over 150,000 green jobs were created in 2011, bringing the nation's total green jobs to over 3 million. Employment in this space grew at 4 times the rate of all other jobs combined. These new green jobs in industries like construction and manufacturing will continue to support the future clean energy economy. We must continue this economic growth by working together to build a stronger, cleaner economy. We have to encourage the collaboration of industry and government toward actions to reduce emissions and plan for future impacts. We must ensure we protect our environment and future generations. That's what this coalition is all about. We don't want to be pitted against each other. Well, we go without jobs because of that division. We don't want to be pitted against each other, whether it's for labor unions trying to protect their workers or environmentalists to protect the environment. We have got to be together, and together we are stronger. If collective bargaining gave the workers rights, because no individual worker has the strength to negotiate the way they could collectively, together the green and the blue can get us to where we want to be. Greater jobs, good paying jobs, a cleaner environment. I'm delighted to be with you and to wish you all the very best. We've got to continue our fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Congressman Waxman. Our next speaker is helping to lead the Department of Energy's work to hasten America's transition to a clean energy economy. Dr. David Danielson is the Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy and leads that office. Before his current position, he was the first program director hired by DOE's Advanced Research Projects Agency. Prior to that, he was an investor focused on clean energy and co-founder of the New England Clean Energy Council. It's my honor to introduce the Department of Energy's Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy, Dr. David Danielson.
Well, good morning, good jobs, green jobs. You guys fired up? So good morning, I'm Dave Danielson. I'm the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. This year, my office is investing $1.8 billion to create American leadership in the transition to a global clean energy economy. My boss, President Obama, has made it abundantly clear that 2 of his major second-term priorities are American-made clean energy and American manufacturing. And I'm here today to tell you about a major new initiative that we've launched at the Department of Energy to take action on these priorities. Now, our nation stands at a truly unique time in terms of the competitive opportunity in front of us in terms of energy and manufacturing. In 2012 alone, $268 billion was invested globally in clean energy, a 500% increase from 2004. And trillions more dollars will be invested in the years to come. So we face a stark choice, in my view. The clean energy technologies of today and tomorrow can be invented and manufactured here in the United States for export around the world, or we can cede global leadership and import these technologies from other nations like China, Germany, and South Korea. At the same time, the American manufacturing sector as a whole remains a significant and strategic sector for U.S. competitiveness. U.S. manufacturing fuels 12% of GDP, continues to be a source of family-sustaining middle-class jobs, and is essential to the technological leadership of our nation, accounting for 70% of private sector R&D investment, 90% of issued patents, and 60% of our exports. To capture this tremendous and urgent opportunity, 3 weeks ago, the Department of Energy launched a new initiative, the Clean Energy Manufacturing Initiative. This is a bold new effort for which President Obama has asked for more than $500 million in his FY14 budget. This initiative has two main objectives. The first is to increase U.S. manufacturing market share of cutting-edge clean energy materials and products, a key economic opportunity for America to innovate, compete, and lead the way in this rapidly growing global marketplace. After decades of successful investments in energy technology R&D, today we find ourselves at a unique time and place in our nation's energy history, in which a surprisingly wide array of clean energy technologies are now clearly within 5 to 10 years of being directly cost competitive without subsidies. And at that point, this becomes a multi-trillion-dollar a year market. The Clean Energy Manufacturing Initiative will seek to ensure that America emerges as the global manufacturing leader in the emerging multi-trillion-dollar clean energy manufacturing market. The second objective of the initiative is to boost U.S. manufacturing competitiveness across the board by increasing energy productivity and energy efficiency throughout the manufacturing sector and taking advantage of the shale gas boom for U.S. manufacturing. There are tremendous opportunities for increased energy efficiency and energy cost competitiveness in U.S. manufacturing, particularly in energy-intensive industries. By supporting cutting-edge manufacturing efficiency R&D and assisting American manufacturers in lowering their energy costs through the adoption of technologies like combined heat and power, we can significantly increase our U.S. manufacturing competitiveness. I want to be clear, when we use the term clean energy manufacturing, we're not just talking about manufacturing wind turbines and solar panels. We mean investing in industries like the U.S. steel industry to make it more competitive by doing things like investing in a new boiler at the ArcelorMittal Indiana Harbor plant, which converts waste heat to power and will save the facility nearly $20 million in energy costs each year. And by investing in cutting-edge R&D for new natural gas-fueled iron production techniques, for which EERE is supporting a collaboration with AISI, U.S. Steel, and ArcelorMittal. I also want to be clear that the DOE's Clean Energy Manufacturing Initiative will pursue these objectives while sustaining core U.S. values, such as environmental stewardship and good wages and working conditions for American workers. There are some who say that the U.S. can't compete in clean energy manufacturing with countries like China and Malaysia that have low-cost labor. That argument is just plain wrong, and we've done the analysis to prove it. Research we're doing as part of this initiative on the factory location decisions of companies manufacturing solar panels demonstrates that low-cost labor is not a key competitive advantage when weighed against other cost factors. Lower labor costs accounts for only about 7 cents per watt cost differential between a Chinese and a U.S. solar panel factory. And that small advantage is more than offset by higher inflation rates and higher financial risks in China. The bottom line conclusion is the factors that we don't want to compete with countries like China on, like labor costs, are not the main competitiveness drivers in solar PV manufacturing. And the critical competitiveness drivers in clean energy are factors that the U.S. can and should compete on. The same is true across the board with a wide array of next-generation clean energy products. With the Clean Energy Manufacturing Initiative, EERE will also be supporting the build-out of President Obama's National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, or the NNMI. NNMI is a plan to create up to 15 new manufacturing innovation institutes all across the country. The first institute, the National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute in Youngstown, Ohio, was formally launched just last August. These institutes will represent major manufacturing centers, which will give a wide array of small, medium, and large businesses access to cutting-edge manufacturing capabilities and workforce training that none of them would be able to access on their own. Through the Clean Energy Manufacturing Initiative, this year EERE will be supporting one of 3 new institutes that will be launched before the end of 2013. We look forward to announcing the competition for the next round of institutes just in the few weeks that are in front of us. And I want, these are called manufacturing innovation institutes, but I want to be clear, the vision here is that these institutes should be magnets for the clean energy jobs of the future. We've already seen that clustering and manufacturing is building around our first institute, and with 15 more of these, we imagine these being strong magnets for clean energy manufacturing jobs going forward. To best inform the Clean Energy Manufacturing Initiative, we need your participation. We're here just at the beginning, which is why ERE will be holding several regional clean energy manufacturing summits all around the country. Our first summit will be in Toledo, Ohio this June, and we will hold additional summits throughout the year. I want to leave you with a quick story that I think clearly demonstrates the opportunity that we have before us in clean energy manufacturing. In February of 2012, General Electric opened a refurbished manufacturing facility at Appliance Park in Louisville, Kentucky, where the company is producing highly efficient next-generation water heaters, creating hundreds of American jobs. GE moved its operations from China, where it had been producing a former version of the appliance. It was the first new assembly line in Appliance Park in 55 years. The water heater, the GE GeoSpring, represents the most cutting-edge new technology. It uses 60% less energy than a typical water heater and saves families on average more than $300 per year on their energy bills. And it's made by members of IUE-CWA. Now, the development of this technology was not guided by some invisible hand. It represents a long-standing public-private collaboration between EERE, its national labs, and the private sector that occurred over the course of 2 decades. And the final location decision was influenced by a 48C advanced manufacturing tax credit of $24 million awarded to GE as part of the Recovery Act. This is a great example that we can't do this alone. We need to have strong public-private partnerships if we want to win the clean energy manufacturing jobs of the future. So the time is now to create many more American manufacturing success stories just like the GE story, and I think that we are on the cusp of some very exciting momentum in terms of a lot more manufacturing coming back to the United States when it comes to clean energy manufacturing. And we intend to use the Clean Energy Manufacturing Initiative to do just that, by ensuring that our investments in energy innovation and efficiency result in greater competitiveness and market share for American manufacturers and good jobs for American workers. Now, we are at a critical moment in the history of energy and manufacturing in America, and we need to take advantage of that. And if we pull together as a nation, we can and will capture this opportunity to compete and win the good-paying manufacturing jobs of the emerging multi-trillion-dollar clean energy market. The time is now for us all to pull together and win this thing, and the Department of Energy and EERE are fiercely committed to working with all of you to make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Danielson, for the terrific work that you're doing. We all know how important it is to address the threat of climate change and get America ready for its impacts, but over the last few years, climate change efforts have suffered setbacks. Today's panel discussion that we're about to enter into features a United States Senator and leaders from the business, environmental, and labor communities, all of whom are focused on how we get addressing climate change back onto the national agenda. To moderate this panel, we're pleased to have Brian Walsh from Time magazine. Mr. Walsh is a senior editor of Time, and he writes the Going Green column for Time and Time.com, and contributes to Time.com's environmental issues blog, Ecocentric. Please extend a warm welcome to our panel and to Brian Walsh from Time magazine.
Thank you very much. It's very great to be here, to be on this panel as well, to talk about this very important subject. 2012 was really the year when I think climate change hit home for a lot of Americans. We experienced a record-breakingly warm winter and spring last year. The Southwest, much of the Midwest, experienced just a catastrophic drought that shriveled corn crops, destroyed pasture land. And then, of course, we experienced in the fall Superstorm Sandy all up along the East Coast, causing tens of billions of dollars of damage, really showing visuals of what we're likely to see in a warmer world. At the same time, though, climate change as a political issue kind of disappeared in some ways from the national agenda. It wasn't something that was talked about a lot during the 2012 presidential election. The chance of action seemed to slip away. But now we're in 2013. There's a new opportunity here. We saw the president certainly talking a lot more about climate change, starting with his inauguration speech, going on to his State of the Union speech. We have the possibility of executive action on carbon regulations for the energy industry that could make a big difference. We have a new Congress as well. So as well, Americans are actually saying that they're interested in this issue. There was a recent poll from Stanford University that said more than 80% of Americans want to see action on the rising sea levels and other dangers we're likely to see from climate change. So the question I think for this panel is really how do we get this issue back on top of the national agenda where it deserves? Where do we find the areas of cooperation between politics, between labor, environmentalists, and big business as well? So we have a great panel here to talk about it. Going from my right, first we have Kevin Anton, who is the Vice President and Chief Officer of Sustainability at Alcoa. To his right, we have Kevin Knobloch, who is the President of the Union of Concerned Scientists. To his right, we have U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. And there we go. And lastly, we have Leo Gerard, the International President of United Steelworkers.
Stop that, too.
So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to talk very briefly about where they're coming from in this subject, and then we'll have a conversation here on stage. Senator Whitehouse, maybe you could start.
Sure. First of all, let me thank all of you for being here and the Blue-Green Alliance for putting this together, because to the extent that your question is, what can we do to make a higher profile for this issue, meetings like this and occasions like this actually answer that question. For quite a while, we've been timid about standing up for what we know the scientific facts to be. I think we got knocked down by a very powerful propaganda campaign by the polluting industries. As you pointed out, the weather changes that we've seen, the sea level changes, have pushed back the public opinion so that the propaganda campaign is, I think, of less and less effect. And now I think it's our task to try to make sure that climate change lines up right behind immigration and gay rights as an issue where the Republicans see that if they stick with this, they're going to run off the cliff like lemmings. In that context, we have a practical problem, which is that the polluting industries own Congress. So there really has to be, in my view, as a predicate, there has to be strong executive action. As Alcoa pointed out in a letter in response to our bicameral task force appeal, most folks in the business community would prefer a legislative solution to an executive regulatory solution. But the industry isn't going to be able to do anything about that if they've stopped either solution. So it's absolutely key that we all put pressure on the White House to take this issue seriously, to not just talk the talk, but actually get out there and walk the walk as well, and to prove that this is a serious issue for them.
Great. Thank you very much, Senator. Kevin Knobloch.
Thank you, Brian, and it's a privilege to be with all of you today. I completely agree with Senator Whitehouse that this is an important moment, but it only becomes an important moment if we push it over into a place of action. That, in my sense, is that the science, the economics, and the politics of climate change and clean energy are rapidly evolving. in a positive direction. So what I mean by the science rapidly evolving is that the body of climate science is now extensive, it's robust, it's held up under scrutiny, and it keeps expanding. We've actually, one of the things that the government has done well, and the research centers in academia across the country have done well, is really expand investigation of this climate phenomenon. And so the body of climate science is very robust. And in fact, what we're seeing in terms of on the ground, whether it's the melting polar ice caps or the extended drought in the Midwest this past summer, or accelerating sea level rise, is an acceleration, a quickening of these climate impacts and climate changes well beyond any or most models and projections that climate scientists have developed to date. That means we're well equipped. We have that knowledge on which to act. Brian talked about all of those climate impacts we've seen just over the last 2 years. So millions of Americans are now connecting the dots between climate-influenced events, extreme weather, and climate change. And they're actually concluding that those climate scientists were right all along, and that those climate deniers who were trying to inject doubt into that science actually had a cynical agenda. You know, we're not, I'm from Boston, and, you know, we all were hit very hard yesterday by that act of evil up in Boston. It did remind me that we're not very good at preempting, at recognizing a coming crisis and acting ahead of time. But on climate change, we now no longer have any excuse, because not only is the science informing us, but the technology is on hand, and you'll hear from Kevin from Alcoa and many others over this conference to confirm that the technology is really coming along very quickly and is available to us. And then, as the Senator said, now it's about the politics. And there, you look across the country, there's a lot of exciting leadership happening. Not only the wind and solar industries have they doubled in capacity and in jobs created and power produced over the last 4 or 5 years, but most of that has happened in red and purple states. You have Republican governors like Sam Brown back in Kansas, and John Kasich in Ohio, and Terry Branstad in Iowa, who are bullish about renewable energy because those industries and those jobs have helped pull those states out of the deep recession. So there's a lot of molecules flowing around that really are going to come together if we, individually and collectively, take those pieces that we've been blessed with and turn them into action. Let's drive this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Leo.
Sort of the question that Brian asked about why are you in this or what's your organization doing, I can't help but think, as I mentioned yesterday at our forum, about growing up in the most polluted place on the planet at the time. I grew up in a mining community called Sudbury, and I won't rehash what we had to do to straighten that out. But for me, it's really quite simple. I want my grandkids to live and I want my grandkids to live on a planet where they don't have to worry about the water in the air, don't have to worry about the melting ice caps, and can have decent jobs. And then when I did my intro, I went through a long list of places where I call it the low-hanging fruit. If we do the things that we know we can do where the carbon is, we can reduce energy consumption, and we can take all kinds of greenhouse gases. I shouldn't talk about just carbon, all kinds of greenhouse gases out of the air. When Sheldon talked about the business community would rather have a legislative solution rather than a regulated solution, I couldn't help but think that we had a legislative solution. It wasn't perfect. It was the Waxman-Markey. We helped get that passed, as Alcoa and other employers did. Even the steel industry was with us on getting that because they knew what the path was. But not on Sheldon's shoulders, but the broken system in the Senate prevented that from even getting to a vote. And so then we got pushed back. And now, since that 2010 ungodly election, we've had the climate deniers thinking that they're winning in Congress. And in my view, we have to hold every Republican member of Congress who wants to be a climate change denier and deny us the jobs that I talked about for my kids and grandkids. We have to go into their congressional district and hold them responsible, just like we're trying to hold them responsible and are going to hold them responsible for some of the crazy votes that they're taking or some of the stuff they're preventing from happening. I don't want this generation, my generation, to be the generation that destroys the planet. And so me, it's fairly simple. It's simple. It's about the future of our kids and grandkids, and it's about having an economy that can deal with the issues at hand. And if we deal with those issues, we'll be at the front end of the research and development on all of the clean environment technology, and we will regain manufacturing, we'll regain the lead in manufacturing, and we'll have families supporting jobs, not just for our generation, but the generations to come. And if we fail, those jobs will be somewhere else. And I want to hold every Republican climate denier accountable for that so that we kick their ass out of office.
Good on you.
Senator, let me
Trying to hold back, but
Oh, don't hold back. This is not the place for holding back. Senator, let me start with you. Leo talked about
Kevin.
Oh, sorry.
Other Kevins.
Sorry.
Two Kevins.
Yes.
Right. I get the Kevins confused. Kevin, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. Tough act to follow, Leo, but I'll do my best. Personally and inside of Alcoa, we believe that climate change is a global but solvable solution. We need to unleash the creative power of business, of labor, of academia, of the government to solve that problem. We need to start talking about this in terms of an opportunity, not a threat. Kevin and I were talking before in the green room about this. The CAFE standard is a great example of a well-crafted legislation where we've been able to create new regulation for miles per gallon in cars. And what did that do? That unleashed great expansions. We're going to put $300 million into our Davenport rolling mill to make automotive sheet for the car industry in the US. That production comes online later this year, 175 great high-paying jobs. The capacity is sold out. We're working on what's the next place to put the next capacity in this country. Those are jobs that didn't exist. We didn't need technology to create those jobs. The technology already existed. We needed a little bit of smart regulation to advance the car companies, create the dialogue in the company, and move forward. We don't need to be afraid of greenhouse gas reductions. In the Alcoa system in the US, with 2005 as a baseline measurement period, we've reduced our GHGs by 18% in that time period from 2005 to 2012. And that's at a like footprint. That's while we're actually adding jobs in those plants. We're not taking jobs away, we're able to add jobs. So smart companies, smart people, innovation can drive us there. Both Leo and the senator spoke about the desire for legislation versus regulation, and we firmly believe that's the path. We cannot give up on going down that path. But that's where we get the innovation. If we have a regulation-only environment, we're afraid that that will not drive the innovation. When we can bring the innovation of the whole country to bear on this issue, we will find the right solutions. And for this generation, Leo said, we don't want to be the generation that that destroys jobs and destroys the environment. We actually should turn that around and say, for us, climate change, for our generation, this is the equivalent of President Kennedy challenging the US to the moon. why can't these organizations come together, bring innovation, and solve the problems? So a friend of mine reminded me of a proverb last week when I was at an aluminum association meeting. He said, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, come together. And I think we've got the right group of people here to come together. So thank you.
Right. I'm pretty sure most people in the room don't know this fact, but when Kevin raised it, I wanted to make sure that I told you we helped create the Apollo Alliance. And we created the Apollo Alliance prior to the Blue-Green Alliance, exactly on the basis of what Kevin said. We call it the Apollo Alliance because we said we could do the same thing on the environment that President Kennedy did about going to the moon. And I lose track of time. About a year ago, the Apollo Alliance and the Blue-Green Alliance merged together. So Blue-Green now includes Apollo. And so we're going to go to the moon together.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. So now we are going to questions. Senator, we were talking about the preference for a legislative solution. We had in 2010, Waxman-Markey did make it through the House, and then of course it sort of petered out in the Senate. We have a different Congress now. Is there a chance of any kind of legislative action on this issue in this Congress, or even maybe looking ahead 2-4 years down the road?
The only things that will prompt legislative action are, first, disasters continuing to the point where the deniers are really on their heels and the public becomes more engaged. That obviously is an unfortunate path to have to travel to get there. The second is strong executive action that forces the issue, because if the industries that are causing most of this pollution are looking down the barrel of a very strong regulation coming out of them at EPA, a very strong purchasing standard coming out of the administration, there are a whole array of ways in which the administration can raise the pressure on them, then they're going to say, wait a minute, let's try the legislature. And when the polluters who control Congress decide that they want Congress to act, the environment changes dramatically. And the third way is a long way, but I think we can get there, and that's simply to be much more active on this so that the Republicans get to the tipping point of understanding that in the same way that they are not just morally, but also generationally and demographically wrong on immigration, not just morally, but demographically and generationally wrong on gay rights, they're also not only morally, but generationally and demographically wrong on climate. And their smart people look ahead and say, this is the end of the party if we go off this cliff, and we've got to recalibrate. Those are the only three vehicles that I see. The only one that can be deployed quickly and without disaster is getting the executive branch to take this seriously and move forward. And in defense of the Senate, I will say that I think the White House went south on us before that bill came up, and the signals from the White House were don't bother.
Is that changing now, do you think?
We'll see. The talk has changed.
Kevin, Anton, for business, how does this work? How do you make climate change work for manufacturing? And also, if it is indeed the regulation is the route we have to go to more immediately, are you all right with that? I mean, the sort of standard for businesses, regulation is something we'd rather see less of, not more of, but is it different in this case?
Yeah, we'll answer the second bit first. We really do struggle with regulation, again, because of the points I made before about it stifles innovation, it's one size fits all. How do we make climate change work in our business? By participating, by helping get the right legislation written. Many of the places we operate around the world already have climate change legislation. We operate in Australia. That's been successful. Quebec is being introduced as we speak. We also operate in Europe, where we see maybe not the best crafted rules and regulations are deindustrializing Europe. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen in this country. But again, as we look at it, the greatest lever we all have is energy efficiency. And you start to think about some of the results I talked about with the 18% reduction in GHGs, a lot of that is driven by process energy efficiency. And we have that coming from PhDs working very hard on our process control systems, down to making sure that the employees in our cast house are closing furnace doors as quickly as they can, running those furnaces as best they can, giving people the data to take decisions. We go through that all. Last year in Alcoa, we had 520 individual energy efficiency programs going on in the company. We saved almost $75 million doing that. There wasn't a project in there that had a greater than 2-year payback. So you talk about, this is why I think it's an opportunity. There is still so much low-hanging fruit. And this is the 5th year in a row of us running an energy efficiency program with similar results. This is all doable, and it doesn't have to be scary.
Leo, there are those who, they may accept that climate change exists, they may be worried about it, but they look at the economy, they look at unemployment, and they say we can't really afford to act now. This will actually hurt job creation. For you, how do you ensure that those climate change policies actually create those middle-class jobs that we really need and that we really want to get out of, to get this economy going?
First of all, I think that the people who are attempting to play that card are just wrong. And again, I take it myself on an individual basis back to where I grew up. And every time we'd talk about cleaning up the workplace, the employer would say, well, you got to have a choice between good jobs and a clean environment. So we chose the clean environment. You know what? Our jobs just got better. They didn't get worse. The reality is that I actually believe that removing greenhouse gases, removing carbon, doing all of the things, becoming more energy efficient, doing all of the things that are there can lead to millions of jobs. Here's the difficulty, in my view. If we don't do it, someone else will. And I don't want to become even more dependent on wind turbines in China than we are oil from the Middle East. I think we can do that so that there's real jobs here. The one thing that was in Waxman-Markey that we thought was important was a border adjustment mechanism for those countries that in fact cheat. And the reality is that if we're going to make these kind of investments in the kind of things that we've talked about, schools, building, water infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure, all of those, we have to make sure that it has a maximum domestic content. Because if it doesn't have maximum domestic content, we'll be creating jobs in other countries. And if we do that, the thing that is most troublesome is if you really look at the facts, the research and development follows the manufacturing. So if we don't do the manufacturing here, then we won't do the R&D here. And if we don't do the R&D here, it'll only be a matter of years before we're so far behind that we're relying on someone else again for our, quote, renewable energy. There is no one who can stand and keep a straight face that can say, if we retrofit our schools, our water treatment plants, our pipelines, our public buildings, our mass transit, build wind turbines here, do energy efficient products here, there's no one that can look any of us in the room in the eye with a straight face and say that that will cost jobs. That's just plain old. To quote an Irishman, that's just plain malarkey.
It's one of the two big lies in this business. The one big lie, and Kevin knows this very well, is that there's some serious doubt about the science. That's a complete lie, and it's part of a propaganda campaign. The other is, if you go down this road, it'll cost you jobs. It's just plain wrong. Indeed, there are more green energy jobs in this country now than there are in the oil and gas sector. And I know that that's true because I was PolitiFacted on saying it. And I got it true, so it's...
Well, that's
Don't count on it.
And it's growing.
Yeah.
The other point that I want to make, and we need to be extremely careful, Kevin Knobloch and I and others have talked about this. The new discovery of gas has to be exploited in the most advanced, scientifically, environmentally sound way. Because if we have another gas gold rush and people's wells start catching fire, then the energy opportunity is going to disappear, and it should. So for those that are in the oil and gas refining and distribution sector, they better do it right because they're messing with our future.
Leo, if I can add one more thing to that, I think we need to be careful and thoughtful about keeping that energy home and be careful
Here,
about
here.
how we allow exports of that.
Here,
We
here, I'm
shouldn't
with
be
you.
racing.
We'll do a coalition on that.
Yeah, we already have one.
That's pretty firm, I'm pretty sure. Kevin, now, look, you could talk a little bit. Environmentalists, gas is one thing where certain environmentalists may diverge somewhat from business, from even from labor on this. Where do you see those areas where you can cooperate in a way that remains true to the science, remains true to what you see as most important for this country and for this planet?
Brian, the key is that when you're trying to solve a problem and address a problem like climate change, like air pollution, water pollution, the key is to have a science-based standard. What does the science suggest that we need to clean up to what level? And be true to that. Don't compromise on that standard. The place to compromise, even if you want to call it a compromise, the place to have flexibility is in how you get there. And I think the fuel economy standards that we've seen during the first President Obama's term, which were also, by the way, greenhouse gas standards in parallel. The standards are very close to one another, but they were greenhouse gas standards, where we now have in place a standard that will double the existing fuel economy of the American passenger vehicle fleet by the year 2025. A phenomenal piece of leadership all around. And the other distinguishing thing about that piece was that the auto companies, organized labor, the United Auto Workers under Bob King's fabulous leadership was right there. The environmental community, the science community, they were all at the table. And that's what happened. There was a little pushback from the auto companies about, oh, maybe can we weaken this? Can we slow walk it? But in the end, they didn't push very hard, or at least they were convinced and they gave up and focused on, are there ways we can, that's attentive to the kinds of things you'll worry about in a business and in a manufacturing facility, an operation. Are there ways we can kind of tweak this and give some flexibility to get there? And so it was a great success story. And now you have this interesting phenomenon on the so-called Tier 3 standards. The Clean Air Act that Congress passed and then updated in 1990 basically was all about cleaning up sulfur dioxides, nitrous oxides, particulates from tailpipes of our vehicles. It's an extraordinary success story because those pollutants are now something 99% cleaner than they were a couple decades ago because of that. Tier 3 is the last significant round of regulation from the Clean Air Act on tailpipe emissions. It's about cleaning up fuels. And there's this interesting thing happening where the auto companies, both domestic and foreign, are allied with the environmental community and ultimately the EPA to write strong rules, because if we don't clean the sulfur out of the fuels, then that advanced technology that is now being put under the hood by auto workers and these companies won't perform as well. So we won't get the efficiency, we won't get the pollution cleanup that they're intended to get if we don't clean up the fuels. So you have the oil and gas industry fighting us now, but the auto companies are on this side and on the right side of this. So it's a phenomenal thing. And the last point I want to make in this, what this showcases for me
They're not going to fight hard here either.
is the need for leadership. And I think, we've knocked heads with the auto company leadership over time, but I will proudly stand up and say, I think the leadership coming out of the auto industry, I'm talking about at the corporate boardroom level, the CEO, executive office suite, is tremendous, particularly GM and Ford. And that the leadership in the other corporate sectors, in the utility sector, in the airline industry, in oil and gas refining, really are now called to step up. And you can argue that the auto industry has stepped up with their near and midterm commitment to driving down greenhouse gas emissions. Those policies are in place. It's now about fully implementing them. What about these other sectors? It's time to stop fighting this change and getting at the head of the parade and leading us forward.
So So Kevin, if you think about what you're saying about the automotives, from where I sit, it looks like the big three have now turned fuel efficiency into a competitive advantage. They've now agreed, everybody's agreed to a standard. They're now trying to hopscotch over each other and say, because the consumer now wants a fuel efficient car. We did a survey 3 years ago that suggested just over half the consumers, the first point in buying a car was fuel economy. We redid that in 2011. 85% of the consumers' first choice is now fuel economy. So they're using it as it's a great combination of the environment and business and profitability all coming together.
And you're seeing the auto sector adding jobs again and starting to flourish again. It's exactly as my panel mates have said. This is good for the economy. This anti-regulatory movement, which is now decades old, which has been highly successful, misses the point that a smartly, thoughtfully crafted regulation trying to address a serious problem, when done well, can create markets for American-made goods and services. These are humans, designing these things. So not every regulation is optimal. Not everyone is done smartly, but if you keep your eye on the ball, you're trying to solve this problem, and you bring the best ingenuity and innovation and thought to it, invariably you're going to create some new markets. And the smart capitalists see that and are there. And I think the auto sector now has come, frankly, full circle from the opposite place, and that's something to be emulated.
Let me hop in because we're the most industrially diversified union in the country. And when Kevin and Sheldon talk about the auto industry, we have 350,000 of our members that make something that could end up in an automobile. Every one of them making an auto part is trying to do it in the most energy efficient way when they do it, but also seeing how their product will work. For example, Goodyear has invented a tire. I don't know anything about the science, but they've invented a tire that improves fuel efficiency because of its resistance level. That's tremendously important. We talk about the sulfur standard in our refineries. Well, we're the dominant refinery union in the country, and the industry didn't fight as hard as they pretended they were going to fight in California when we did that. Now they're crying and moaning and doing what they usually do because they only made $40 billion last year at Exxon. And so I talked with our vice president who's responsible for the oil industry and refining, and I said to him, Gary, what's our members say? He said, they're just happy to leave them keep crying. Go ahead and make sure you support this. So our members get it. And if our members get it, there's no reason why the rest can't get it, because they're actually in the refining industry and they know it's not going to hurt them very much.
Senator, we're all sort of waiting a bit on the EPA right now. We're waiting for the confirmation of the next EPA head as well, Gina McCarthy.
We think she's a terrific appointment, by the way.
What do you actually want to see? If the EPA does go forward on this, I mean, what would be best for this action, for ensuring that this one step that's within the president's authority can be taken that actually does push us further along this path we need to go?
We want to see a carbon standard. We want to see it for existing power plants. We want to see the air regulations enforced, because a lot of particulate matter, soot, and other pollutants that are in the air, when you address them, you also, as a collateral matter, tend to solve the carbon problem. And that would be the most, I think, the primary focus we'd like out of EPA. But one of the reasons that Henry Waxman and I started the bicameral climate group is so that we could have a formal way for people who cared about this in both houses of Congress to get together and agree on where we should prod the administration to move forward, agree on what our legislation should look like, and have a forum where we can try to sort of gather the armies so that the coalition on this, which has been mentioned up here already, which is actually really broad. I mean, here's Alcoa sitting right here.
Right.
You've been mentioning the car companies. Property casualty insurers are nuts on this subject. You've got the faith community out there. You've got hook and bullet conservation groups out there. So we want to organize all of that so that when the administration decides that they can pull the trigger on this, they're looking at armies that are ready to go. And you got to think about this like a field marshal thinks about it. You've got your divisions. How do you deploy them? When do you call them out? When do you call out your military is going to be an important signal from the president. When is he willing to have his top national security team make climate change and its national security issues a top issue? So it's, you know, there are a whole lot of fronts that we can push and prod them on, and also demonstrate to them that there are a lot of people that are ready to have their back, and they don't have to worry as much as they might be thinking.
Great. Now, I know this panel, I think, could talk about this issue literally all day, but we do have to wrap things up and move on with this conference. Thank you very much for a great discussion. And thank
Can
you
I make
again
one last request?
Oh, sure. All right.
This is an ask for everybody here in the room. I want to ask you to do two things. One, whenever you have the opportunity, do what you can to expose the propaganda campaign that is on the other side. The only way to fight it is to really put light on it, and we need to do everything we can to put light on it. The second thing is, I want your help to build a local, curated climate wiki, so that when I'm arguing with people in Washington about climate, I'm not quoting the IPCC or the Sierra Club. Because when I'm trying to impeach them in the trial lawyer sense with that kind of information, they love it. It's like getting their back rubbed. It's the best thing. They can go back to their base and say, those pointy-headed intellectual environmentalists really came after me, ha ha ha. What I need is the mayor in their home state who had to move the sewage treatment back because of sea level rise, the highway department that had to lift the highways because of storm surge, the local quail hunting group that has published in its document the changes in the habitat that are happening, the state university meteorological report that talks about climate change. Because when you set them at odds with their own states and their own officials, then you've got the weapons that you need to really move this forward. When you're only turning them against the national environmental community and creating that opposition, it's an opposition that they try to define themselves in. You are not hurting them, you're actually helping them. So help if you can, and contact my office if you're interested. We're in the early stages of trying to build a curated climate wiki where you can go to a state, click, and all the local good detail can be summarized.
Sheldon said he wanted to ask you for two things. He only asked you for one. I'm going to ask you for the other one.
Expose the
jobs,
wiki.
Jobs, jobs. Keep telling him that this isn't either or, it's both or neither. Thank you.
All right. Again, thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to the Blue Green Alliance.
Good job. Well done.
Please join me in thanking the panel one more time. "115 miles up I-95 from here, at the top of the Chesapeake Bay, in July 2001, an above-ground tank exploded at the Motiva refinery in Delaware City, Delaware. When the contents of the tank, 100,000 gallons of sulfuric acid, spilled into the Delaware River and then got into the Chesapeake, the EPA Clean Water Act fine was $10 million. The Clean Water Act is one of the great legislative achievements of the 1970s, the era when Congressman Waxman came to DC. Before the Clean Water Act, Lake Erie had been declared dead. The Cuyahoga River had caught fire. The Potomac River was an open sewer. Now, all around the country, it's safer and healthier to drink the water and to swim and fish in the water because of the Clean Water Act. The 1970s also saw the passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. The first OSHA standards, like lockout tagout that prevents a machine from being turned on while it's being repaired, or guardrails on walkways and staircases, are credited with preventing 400,000 deaths. But political opposition has prevented OSHA from keeping up with the changes in the American workplace and keeping down the rates of workplace injuries and deaths. How bad has the opposition been, and how out of date are OSHA rules and fines now? Well, the tank explosion that caused the fish and crab kill, it also killed a Boilermaker named Jeff Davis, the father of 5, and injured 8 other workers. The total OSHA fine for the series of serious violations that led up to the explosion was $175,000. $175,000 for dissolving a man, compared to $10 million for killing fish and crabs. Please understand that I'm not suggesting that the Clean Water Act fines are too large. So let me give you another comparison. The maximum OSHA penalty for a serious violation is capped at $7,000. The maximum FCC penalty for broadcasting indecent content is $325,000. OSHA fines are scandalously out of date and ineffective. We're talking about people's health. We're talking about people's lives. On April 28th, all around the country, we'll be commemorating the anniversary of the founding of OSHA and the loss of health and lives of so many workers around the country at Worker Memorial Day commemorations. Anna Fendley from the Steelworkers has put information from the AFL-CIO about Workers Memorial Day on the literature table outside. Or you can go to workersmemorialweek.org to find out more information. We hope you'll go home and sign up to attend a local event or to put together an event of your own. Senator Murray has just reintroduced a bill to modernize the Occupational Safety and Health Act and to bring it into the 21st century. If the OSHA law had been strong enough to protect Jeff Davis's life, it would have saved all those fish and crabs as well. Protecting workers protects the environment, and protecting the environment can create safer conditions for workers. Modernizing the law is one way we can create this win-win for workers and the environment, but we don't need to wait for Congress to act. That's why I'm so proud to be introducing all of you to Deborah Fisher, the longtime health and safety representative for D-Max, a company in Ohio that builds more fuel-efficient diesel engines for trucks, and for all of IUE CWA Local 755 in Dayton, Ohio, and more recently, the health and safety coordinator for all of IUE CWA. Please join me in welcoming Deborah Fisher.
Good morning. This is my first time to DC. Anybody else's first time? Yeah. So Charlotte told you I'm from Dayton, Ohio. Our flowers haven't come up yet. But I work there at D-Max. And D-Max is a diesel manufacturer. We build diesel engines for General Motors trucks, the heavy-duty trucks. My job there, I've been there about 15 years, and I do health and safety. And I try to make things safer when we find them. But one of the challenges, as you know, is finding them. So one of the opportunities we have here is to share and network. And so one of the things I want to talk to you today is about the chemical chaos that's killing about 40,000 workers in our workplaces every year. 40,000 Americans die prematurely because they're exposed to toxic substances at our work. That's 10 times the accident rate. These chemicals aren't just hurting workers. They're in our everyday substances, they're in our air, they're in our water, and they're in our food. And I also want to talk to you about breast cancer. A recent study shows that young women that work in automotive plastics and food processing, they have 5 times more breast cancer. So you're probably saying, well, we have laws and we have regulations. Maybe the study's not right. Well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about those rules and regulations. They're outdated. Not by a couple years, by a couple decades. We have about 10,000 chemicals in our workplaces. OSHA has exposure limits for 16 of them. 16. And out of 80,000 plus chemicals in commerce, EPA has required testing on 200 of those. So as you've heard Congressman Waxman talk earlier about we need to reform, we need to modernize these rules and laws, we do. And Mr. Waxman's been a great leader in trying to move our chemical laws forward, but he's one person. We need 100 more like him in Congress. But what do? While we're waiting to rebuild Congress, we can't be sitting around twiddling our thumbs. We can't be complaining. We've got to do something. So what do? One idea. I was part of a worker team that helped create ChemHat. www.chemhat.org. ChemHat is a website that workers can go to, look up a chemical, and it'll tell them how it's going to harm their body. Now, this team of designers that put this together, these were a bunch of us. There was the Blue-Green Alliance, the Steelworkers, the Tony Mazzocchi Center, the communication workers, the District 9, and the industrial division that I'm a part of. I think that we could all say we're pretty proud of this website. It's very simple. You can go there, put that chemical in, and find out how it can harm you. But is that enough? What are we going to do? We've got to change it. We've got to find a safer alternative. It's just going to stress you out right now. That's why you have stress balls on your table for ChemHat. ChemHat was designed to take the stress out of it. It's designed to find safer alternatives. It's designed for us to find a safer way to make chemicals that can then make products. So that's the goal today. We're launching a new initiative, putting breast cancer out of work. Next slide. We believe that we can make automotive components with chemicals that don't cause breast cancer. And we don't believe it's impossible to do food processing without chemicals that cause breast cancer. We need to build jobs that are green, safe jobs, and we need less cancer. More work, less cancer. Less cancer, more work. It's very simple. We have to work together, and we have to find safer alternatives for the hazardous chemicals that we're exposed to. I hope you'll join us.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Yvette Pena-Lopez. I'm the Deputy Director of the Blue-Green Alliance, and I have the distinct honor of introducing our last speaker and closing out this part of our very exciting plenary. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and new faces, so thank you for being here with us. Jacqueline Patterson is currently the Climate Justice Initiative Director for the NAACP. Last year, she facilitated a partnership between NAACP and Women of Color United to engage in the Women of Color for Climate Justice Road Tour to uplift stories of differential impact, community local self-reliance, and community resistance of women of color and communities of color. Prior to her work with the NAACP, Jackie worked as a trainer, organizer, researcher, program manager, and policy analyst on international and domestic issues and social justice movements. We've been thrilled to have her on the 2013 Good Jobs, Green Jobs Advisory Committee. And yesterday, she enthralled conference attendees with a day-long program focused on bridging the gap between Black communities and the green economy. Please welcome Jackie Patterson.
Sorry. Thank you so much, and good morning. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what happened yesterday at our pre-conference as just kind of some closing remarks. I will also echo some of the things that have already been said. So yesterday at our pre-conference, Bridging the Gap, Connecting Black Communities to the Green Economy, over 100 people participated in an intense agenda-setting conversation about defining the green economy based on principles of equity and justice. We have people from universities, labor organizations, environmental organizations, and entrepreneurs, as well as grassroots organizers, policy advocates, and neophytes who are just looking to deepen their engagement in this work. Participants discussed the current challenges that communities face, as my previous speakers talked about. We are in a country that gets its energy from production processes and facilities that are more often than not hazardous to the communities that are host to the operations, largely communities of color and low-income communities. Whether it's the TVA oil spill or coal ash spill, the BP oil drilling disaster, the Arkansas oil spill, or the death by 1,000 cuts that are communities communities who are host to the 400-plus coal-fired power plants across the country experience due to breathing air full of toxins or fishing out of mercury-contaminated waters. We have a dangerous relationship with energy production and its frontline workers, low-income communities, and communities of color that are bearing the brunt of that impact. We also generate 356 pounds of waste every year, and that largely goes into the backyards and at times the water supplies of communities of color and low-income communities through our harmful practices of either burying or burning waste. As per the theme of the Good Jobs, Green Jobs conference, the impacts don't stop at the host communities who are ingesting pollution from the harmful practices. These same waste disposal and energy production processes and facilities that produce them are also major drivers of the catastrophic climate change that we are already seeing today. People say that if we don't change our habits, we'll be on a catastrophic course towards climate change. For folks in communities across the country, especially in the Northeast affected by Sandy and Irene, and in the Gulf ravaged by hurricanes Rita, Katrina, Isaac, and onward, not to mention globally in places like the Philippines, Madagascar, and the Dominican Republic, I'm sure they would argue that the catastrophes have already arrived. Besides this extreme weather we have in countries and communities, we have countries and communities like the Maldives and places in the United States like Thibodaux, Louisiana, and Kivalina, Alaska, that will literally be underwater within 20 years, where whole communities are facing displacement. Any farmers in the room can also tell you that we have lands that were once fertile and brimming with abundance that are now barren. And scientists are saying that it's only going to get worse. All of this is in the context of communities with double-digit unemployment, people who are paying up to 50% of their income on energy costs, people who are underinsured in terms of their health and their property, people who are suffering from voter disenfranchisement and overall political marginalization, particularly in a political system where we know that moneyed interests drive way too many of the decisions that are made. All of these factors exacerbate the cycle of harmful impacts. However, we also talked about the solutions that we'll hear more about over these coming days. We highlighted promising practices rooted in our shared vision, including worker ownership models from the Mondragon co-ops in Spain to the equal exchange model in the United States. We talked about community-owned utilities that transition us from energy production processes that harm our communities to models that eliminate those hazards while creating jobs. We also highlighted the local food movements to reduce harmful pollution from transport while growing local economies and eliminating the existing gap between nutritious and affordable foods for Black communities and Latino communities. We highlighted zero waste initiatives that are safely recycling waste and creating thousands of jobs. We determined that an action plan to ensure that communities of color can actualize a vision of just and sustainable communities of color and low-income communities can actualize a vision of just and sustainable communities must encompass the following: the reframing and the redefining of a green economy which is contextualized within a holistic vision of just and sustainable communities, operating on principles that are already existing, such as the environmental justice principles of 1991, the Jemez principles of organizing, and the Bali climate justice principles, all of which were established through consensus-driven processes of large groups like the ones that are gathered here. We need increased support for worker safety and worker rights. We need targeted outreach to constituencies to be engaged more deeply, the constituencies that are currently not part of this process. We need support for a significant expansion of worker ownership and worker cooperative models, as well as community economic development models, from community benefits agreements to community-owned utilities and beyond. We need funding support for the realignment of organizing that includes developing scalable funding models that are asset-based and whole community focused. We need meta-funding mechanisms where there are intermediaries that provide access to funding for grassroots organizing and worker-based organizing in frontline communities. We need to support research initiatives that examine the barriers to participation in the green economy for certain communities, as well as research that documents technological and other solutions that advance sustainability. We need a definition of clean energy that does no harm to communities that are host to production processes and to others. We need to develop a legislative scorecard that looks at our elected officials and judge them based on equity and climate policies that they enact, and make sure that they represent the interests of the frontline communities. We need to develop a pipeline of youth engaging in the sciences and other relevant fields, emphasizing integrating a historically and culturally relevant perspective for youth of color. We need explicit programs that advance youth entrepreneurship and leadership. And we need to make sure that training execution happens only if jobs are an endpoint. We don't want to, in a time where people don't have time and don't have the luxury of time, we want to make sure that when they are being trained, they actually have jobs at the end of that. And we also need campaign finance reform, because we need to get money out of politics and make sure that politics represent people. So, we are pleased to be with you all over the coming days, because a number of us have stayed after the pre-conference, and we look forward to linking arms and working with you all to address the aim of looking at these issues that may impact some communities more, but impact all communities. Through our collective action, we can ensure that for all of us, we uphold our mutual constitutional right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie, for everything that you and the NAACP do for the green economy and for communities everywhere. So this was a fabulous, fabulous morning, just a great beginning to the conference. So before you head off to your first set of workshops, which will begin at 10:30, so you have a tiny break there, I do have a few announcements to make. We invite all of you to tweet about the conference. You can follow us at GJGJ Conference, and if you tweet, use hashtag GJGJ2013 or hashtag Good Green Jobs. Also, please make sure to fill out the Stay in Touch cards that you have at your tables and take those great helmets and light bulbs with you and squeeze them all day. And don't forget that we're going to be back here in this room for a very, very special luncheon. Be here at noon sharp. We're going to have Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi. We're going to have a great panel discussion. Yes, Pelosi, hoo-hoo, female power there. We will have a great panel discussion on rebuilding America's infrastructure to be ready for climate change. And finally, I really just want to thank all of you for being here with us. It's because of you that this conference is going to be a great success, so it's really tremendous to have all of you. So thank you again. See you at 12 o'clock sharp. Oh, also, you can drive. You can go for a joyride if you go out to the terrace later. There is a Volt and Chevy Cruise that you can go for a nice joyride, in which our sponsors have allowed folks to do that. So please do enjoy that. See you at 12. Enjoy your workshops. Thank you very much, everybody.